Welcome to Digging Deeper. I'm your host, Gabe Yanis. On this episode and every episode. Oh, okay. Sorry. Trying to get used to this. Let's try that one more time. Welcome to Digging Deeper. I'm your host, Gabe Yanis. On every episode of Digging Deeper, I will talk about labor, religion, and politics, their history and their intersections, and how they affect us today. So be sure to give us a like and a subscribe and hit that notification button to always on so you don't miss our live episodes on Mondays. On today's episode, we will be talking about UPS Union's protests in New York about working in trucks without air conditioning during a heat wave. We'll be talking about how Republicans took a stand against veterans' health care. Yay! And the Pope asks for forgiveness for the treatment of Native people in Canada, specifically at uh, residential schools. So first off, let's talk about UPS workers rally in New York to protest hot working conditions. This took place on July 28th, 2022. I'm going to read a little bit from an article on CNBC by Jack Stebbins. UPS workers rallied Thursday morning to demand that the company provide workers adequate relief during periods of extreme heat. Union leaders at the rally described UPS distribution centers as infernos with limited air conditioning. The rally was inspired by the June death of 24-year-old Esteban Chavez, a UPS driver who collapsed while working at a 90-degree day in Pasadena, California. The event concluded with a moment of silence for Chavez. UPS responded to the claims by union officials by saying the health and safety of its workers are the company's top priorities. UPS drivers are trained to work outdoors and to manage the effects of hot weather. A company spokesperson told CNBC, much of the United States has suffered through extraordinarily high and in some cases record-breaking temperatures of late. New York City has seen consistent temperatures in excess of 90 degrees. The city reported a heat-related death last week. Teamsters Local 804, representing 8,000 workers in the metro New York area, gathered outside the UPS Customer Center in Brooklyn next to an inflatable fat cat holding a bag of money and delivery worker by the neck. UPS employs more Teamsters than any other company. The national union contract is set to expire on July 31st of next year, and Local 804 union leaders Thursday warned of a possible strike. Local 804 President Vincent Perrone read from the UPS quarterly earnings report from Tuesday, which surpassed Wall Street's expectations. They're projected off of your backs, you are quoted, you're projected off of your backs, you brothers and sisters, to have revenue of over $100 billion in 2022, Perrone told the crowd of delivery drivers and warehouse workers. Perrone, who was a UPS delivery driver for 25 years, said that he had sought medical attention on 3 separate occasions throughout his career. Perrone has been the Local 804 president for 3.5 years. I had 4 drivers just last week on Thursday and Friday that had to go to the emergency room because of the heat, Perrone told CNBC during the rally. In one case, he said management didn't call an ambulance. These buildings are infernos inside, he said. The only things that are air conditioned are the management's offices and where they keep their electronics. So, when we look at this, there's basically a few things that we can talk about. So this is happening at the same time that many of the part-time workers for UPS had their wages reduced while profits have been growing. UPS profits are expected to increase tenfold this year, which means a huge amount of money is being made by UPS in general, while they're simultaneously cutting the wages for part-time workers and finding ways to cut costs, skirt safety, regulations, and find ways to continue to increase that profit margin while lowering basically the safety and well-being of their workers. I don't know how many of you have experienced this kind of working environment, working in a restaurant for a lot of years. I remember we would set little thermometers out, and the temperatures in our building would register 90, 100, 110 degrees on the regular, and it does make it a very dangerous situation. I've seen, cooks pass out from heat exhaustion. I've seen people have to go to the hospital because they can't handle it. And this notion that you can be trained to like handle the weather correctly is really pretty disingenuous considering the state of weather as it is these days. There's there's an increasing uh, there's an increasing climate crisis that some of you may or may not have heard of, that has caused heat waves absolutely throughout the country. Um, and because of this like situation, because of this increasing heat, there's other uh, there's other states that are trying to address that. In Oregon, they actually passed safety rules that took it, um, basically force employers to give people cool down breaks and ways to acclimate to the heat, and they have to be accommodating to people that are basically running the risk of heat exhaustion, heat stroke, those kinds of things. And because of the consistent heat wave that's been happening in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of those rules are being tested to their extremes. And there are employers that aren't wanting to participate in that, uh, because they're not necessarily concerned with worker safety, they're more concerned with their profit margin. There's another thing that kind of plays into this, that has to do with the pay cut that a lot of the part time UPS workers took. Most of them ended up taking almost a $3 an hour pay cut. And while taking the pay cut, most of those workers still remained on the job. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever had the unpleasant experience of having a pay cut or like a no pay raise, promotion or review where you're basically told, you're not going to make any more money, because your work is not good enough. But unfortunately, when we statistically look at it, we can see that there has been a drastic increase in worker productivity. Um, while pay rates have gone up since the 70s, like 15, 16, 17% or so, you're looking at 60 to 70% increases in worker productivity. So the amount of work that's being done for largely the same wages is drastic. There's also this notion of job mobility, where people are reticent to move from job to job, even though that's the best way for you to get more income, is to actively seek out a job that's in the similar field or in a field that you're trained for that has better pay, and to leave your old job to get to your new job. It's actually the best way for you to find better wages. But people, for the sake of stability, are often reticent to leave their jobs. Nobody wants to leave a job that they've been at for a long time, even if the job is treating you poorly. Um, don't If I could suggest something, and obviously I'm not you, don't do that. Like, find ways to make more money. There is a notion that somehow if you maintain your status quo, if you maintain the amount of time and effort that you're putting into your job, that eventually your job will recognize you and you will earn a promotion or you will earn better wages. And that isn't necessarily true. As a matter of fact, a lot of companies will go so far as to find ways to cut your wages in an effort to increase their bottom line. Um, for the workers in New York, in Oregon, you postage workers, one of my best friends is a rural carrier here in Colorado. Stay safe. They don't pay you enough to risk your life to deliver a package. Nobody pays you enough money to risk your life standing in a warehouse facility. No one pays you enough money to endanger yourself um, to make it so that you may not go home today. Take care of yourself, stand up for yourself, and if worst comes to worst, definitely organize your workplace. the rebirth of the unions should happen. And it doesn't need to be the AFL-CIO. It doesn't need to be the Teamsters. It can be homegrown. Organization just requires you and the people that you work with to say, we want this or we don't work. So, and you would think, oh, they can just hire somebody else, but nobody wants to work. On to the next story. So there's anger as Republicans block a bill to help military veterans exposed to toxins. Quick warning, this article has some strong language because it involves Jon Stewart, who has been very active, very, very active in promoting the PACT Act. It's called the Honoring Our Pact Act. Those two words are difficult for me to say together. Jon Stewart has been an advocate for veterans' rights and veterans' medical rights for quite some time now, and I have a ton of respect for him. My brother is a veteran. My son is active, well, in the National Guard, but he's currently active because he's doing training right now. The people that are willing to sacrifice their lives for us deserve better. So let's read a little bit from an article by Sam Levine, who is writing from New York for The Guardian. The comedian Jon Stewart ripped into Republican senators on Wednesday after they abruptly halted a bipartisan bill that would expand health care access for military veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. The former host of The Daily Show, who now hosts The Problem with Jon Stewart on Apple TV Plus, has lobbied for the bill. He called those who switched their votes stab vets in the back senators. He added, P.S. Fuck the Republican caucus and their empty promise for our veterans. The measure, called the Honoring Our Pact Act, would make it easier for veterans to access military care related to exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam and toxins from pits used to burn military waste in Iraq and Afghanistan. A version of the bill passed the Senate 84-14 earlier this year, but was sent back to the House for some technical corrections, where it also easily passed. But on Wednesday, 25 Republican senators who had previously supported the bill declined to move it forward. John Cornyn, a Texas Republican, told CNN Republicans did not back the measure because Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, was blocking votes on amendments Republicans wanted. Cornyn also said Republicans wanted to negotiate more on a bill that had already passed the Senate and the House and just need to be reaffirmed in order to cut out some mandatory spending contained in the bill. Stewart called that justification bullshit. Republicans blocked the veterans measure just after Schumer from New York and Joe Manchin of West Virginia announced they had reached a deal on sweeping tax and climate measure. The Schumer-Manchin announcement reportedly caught Republicans off guard after another big measure to support the U.S. semiconductor industry passed the chamber earlier in the day. In a speech on the Senate floor, Joe Tester, the Montana Democrat who chairs the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, said, "Putting this policy off does nobody good whatsoever." Tester also issued a strongly worded statement lamenting an 11th hour act of cowardice and saying Republicans chose today to rob generations of toxic exposed veterans of the health care and benefits they so desperately need. And make no mistake, more veterans will suffer and die as a result. Stewart also criticized Patrick Toomey, a Pennsylvania Republican, who urged his colleagues to halt the bill because of the way it allocated discretionary funds, Roll Call reported. Stewart wrote, "Congratulations, Senator Toomey. You successfully used the Byzantine Senate rules to keep sick veterans suffering. Kudos. I'm sure you'll celebrate by kicking a dog or punching a baby or whatever terrible people do for fun." Obviously, Jon Stewart is no shrinking violet. He is also not any kind of he's not any kind of fan of the Republicans. Never has been, which is totally fine. The reality, though, is that this is a bill that is intended to help veterans, and unfortunately, our government has a track record of not helping veterans. It bears repeating that the 25 senators who flipped their vote had previously voted for the same bill with no issues, including Senators Ted Cruz and Mitch McConnell, who used their vocal support of the military to get elected. There's actually currently a video going around of Ted Cruz fist bumping as they blocked this bill. paired with him saying thank you very, very, very much to the veterans who have served, some of whom have gotten incredibly sick, and some of whom have even died in the service of our country. During peace and wartime, our military does a lot. Obviously, it has its own issues, its own internal problems, things which Republicans also want to block, like investigating extreme right wing and white supremacist groups within the military, something that will probably get discussed on a subsequent episode. Uh, there is this notion that Republicans somehow are the party of the military. They are eager to send people off to war. They're eager to get into conflicts with other nations, but at the same time, they are reticent to spend government money on the health care and the well being of veterans as it was promised to them. Little bit of anecdotal. So this is a conversation that I had between my brother, myself, and my son, but it's not necessarily factually based in the sense that it really can only be proven to have happened to my brother. I can't say that this is a systematic response to people, but I do know that it is not uncommon, but it's still anecdotal, which I think is important to point out. My brother, when he found out that my son was going into the military, said something very important to me. He said, whatever it is that Ashton is wanting to get out of the military, besides, the standard paycheck and those sorts of things, but more in the sense of like payment for college education, how to get his free health care, those sorts of things, is that he needs to actively pursue it because the military is not going to reach out to him to give it to him, even though it is something, a benefit that has been promised to him. Much in the same way that corporate America is not going to hold your hand through anything that they are willing to offer you, they're going to make it more difficult or even prohibitive, like in its difficulty. My brother said that he would be more than willing to walk my son through those processes because he had to go out of his way to force the military to give him the things that they said they would give him. We see that reflected in these kinds of votes where we have promised health care to veterans. That is what the VA is for. That is what it is intended to do. But so often the VA fails, not because it's a federalized health system, but because of the consistent underfunding at the hands of politicians of both parties who are more willing to spend money on their own bizarre pet projects than they are to spend money on veterans that have returned from war or returned from service. And they're more prone to spend money on building the war machine so that we can continue to have more bases than anyone else in the world, in our own nation and outside of our nation, which, when you think about it, is really, really strange. Think about how you would respond if, even a friendly country like the United Kingdom or Ukraine built a military base with a military presence on United States soil. It's a really strange concept when you really dig down into it. Our government is more willing to spend money on the growth of that empire, the growth of the war machine, than on the people that have come back from that service and are now sick or injured because of it. Senators have been releasing public statements to justify their vote, like the trite response from Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, where he said, "I support providing coverage to service members affected by burn pit exposure. Unfortunately, the bill as written includes an unnecessary provision that opens the door for more reckless government spending unrelated to the VA. I voted no on cloture tonight to insist on having the ability to amend the bill to correct this." That's fine. If he wants to vote to amend the bill, it's not like it's been in subcommittees. It's not like it's been in the House and the Senate already. It's not like it's been through its process and this was just a finalized vote, it sounds like it's just sour grapes over a different bill that has nothing to do with the VA. So, as a consequence, the VA is being punished because a group of 25 people feel like they're not getting their way. Um, and meanwhile, those same people are going to pat the backs of veterans and say, thank you for your service. If we are to ask people to fight and die for our country, we have to be willing to support them when that work is finished. This country has a long history of failing to do that, and I hope that through our voice, through veterans' voices, through the voices of people like Jon Stewart, we can actually make some waves, some efforts to sort of push back against that and maybe make the world a better place for veterans. So, moving on to the last story, last 10 minutes of this first episode of Digging Deeper. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Before I go on, a quick reminder, please like and subscribe and set the notifications to always on. We'd love to have you on the next episode. Watching, commenting, doing whatever. Let's get on to the last one. It's funny to think about this show as the things that you're not supposed to talk about around the table. So we've covered religion, or we've covered labor, we've covered politics. Let's talk about religion a little bit. The Pope apologizes for the deplorable evil of Indigenous abuse in Canadians' Catholic residential schools. Let's read a little bit of an article from CNN.com written by Jack Guy. Honestly, the most reporter name of all time. This is Jack Guy. Sorry, I had to. This is a serious article. I apologize for the joking about Jack's name, but Pope Francis has spoken of his sorrow, indignation, and shame over the Catholic Church's role in the abuse of Canadian Indigenous children in residential schools as he kicked off a week-long penitential pilgrimage to the country. The Pope apologized and promised a serious investigation into what happened in a speech at a meeting with Indigenous peoples in Edmonton, Alberta on Monday. Indigenous leaders have long called for a papal apology for the harm inflicted for decades on Indigenous children who suffered abuse and the erasure of Indigenous culture in the country's residential schools. Quote, I ask forgiveness in particular for the ways in which many members of the church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference, in projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation promoted by the governments of that time, which culminated in the system of residential schools, the pontiff said. Last year, hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered on the grounds of former residential schools in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. And Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission has reported that more than 4,000 Indigenous children died either from neglect or abuse in residential schools, many of which were run by the Catholic Church. In the face of this deplorable evil, the Church kneels before God and implores his forgiveness for the sins of her children, said the Pope. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the Indigenous people, and the pontiff underlined that his apology is just the first step in righting these wrongs. An important part of this process will be to conduct a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assist the survivors of the residential schools to experience healing from the traumas they suffered, he said. The Pope will also travel to Quebec and Canadian names sometimes are tough because I don't speak Inuit. Iqaluit, capital of the Canadian territory of Nunavut. During the trip, 2 Canadian cardinals will accompany him throughout his visit, Cardinal Marc Ouellet and Cardinal Michael Cerny. Francis is 85 and had a trip to Africa earlier this month canceled due to issues with his knee. Pope, I feel that knee stuff. My knees are bunk, but I don't necessarily feel the apology fully, but that has more to do with my preconceived notions of the church than anything else. For those of you who don't know, let's do a quick description of what a residential school was. Residential schools were government-sponsored religious schools that were established to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. Although the first residential facilities were established in New France, the term usually refers to schools established after 1880. Residential schools were created by Christian churches and the Canadian government as an attempt to both educate and convert Indigenous youth and to assimilate them into Canadian society. However, the schools disrupted lives and communities, causing long-term problems among Indigenous people. The last residential school closed in 1996. Grolier Hall, which closed in 1997, was not a state-run residential school in that year. Since then, former students have demanded recognition and restitution, resulting in the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement of 2007 and a formal public apology by Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2008. In total, an estimated 150,000 First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children attended residential schools. So I don't. There's no way to really justify what happened. Basically, the church and the state, in unison in Canada, created a system in which they literally took children from parents, put them in schools, and forced them to stop speaking their native language, to learn the language around them, whether it be Canadian English or French. And then also insisted that they not participate in their rituals, in their ceremonies, in anything that had to do with the culture from which they come. This kind of eradication of culture is genocide. You are taking an entire group of people and attempting to eliminate them. We talk a lot on Spite about Christian nationalists and the danger they're in. And one of the things that I said in another video is that the real danger with Christian nationalism is that once you set yourself up as, I am honoring God and my country, and put those two things together, it allows you to eliminate anybody that doesn't stand behind both of those beliefs, but you feel morally justified because you're doing it not only in God's name, but in the name of the good of the country. So as a consequence, this notion that merging religion and nationality into one cohesive unit is a good thing really should be something that not only all Americans but all Christians should really balk at. There is absolutely nothing biblical about a Christian state. There's absolutely nothing biblical about a Christian nation. This notion that your religion should be used as a bully to force other people into not just believing, but acting, looking, dressing, speaking, singing, dancing, participating in the same things. Like, when you remove somebody's culture, you're removing everything about them. Think about how rich and exciting a place like France or Italy or Germany is, because it is its own culture. Like, this notion of whiteness, of, this Western civilization descendancy is a purely American thing. The people that live in Italy, that live in France, that live in Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, wherever, they consider themselves those things. They have their own cultural traditions. They even have their own languages, much in the same way that the native peoples in the Americas, and Mesoamerica and South America did. The eradication of those cultures, those languages, it's genocide. To take away, you're literally taking away a people group by forcing them to stop acting like themselves, and that's disgusting. And while a serious investigation seems like a great idea, an apology and an investigation seems very milk toast, for lack of a better term. Is the apology from Aponov enough, or does real work need to be done to repair the damage that's been done by the church? Um, it often gets away with saying sorry and just walking away from the situation. Like, the church has never really reconciled like its sex scandals. It often puts one person out as the scapegoat. This is the guy that actually committed the act, and says that guy's going to get punished, but the church itself goes on. And that can be disgusting. So much of indigenous culture was lost at the hands of those that believe that Western civilization is the civilization, when the reality is it's a very contrived and invented and pigeonholed concept. This, when you look at the Proud Boys talking about being a Western civilization chauvinist, you know, that notion is based in nothing. Like, most of those people couldn't even tell you what Western civilization means. They just think it means Eurocentric history, without realizing that most of the ideas come from Greek philosophy filtered through Roman philosophy, who then created a state Christianity in a cynical attempt to unite the Roman Empire. Uh, to not look back into the history and see that so much of it is born of attempted genocide, bloodshed, warfare, the oppression of people based on their cultural perspectives, to ignore all of that and just say, hey, we're sorry, we beg you and God for forgiveness, I'm out, seems a little half-ass, if you ask me. Um, as a descendant of an indigenous people, I try to recognize in every moment how that is going to inform my life. Because so much of my education, so much of my learning, so much of what I put into my mind is based in that cultural Western civilization. And learning about the culture that I came from has become so difficult because of the purging of information, of just knowledge for hundreds of years at the hands of the church, more often than not. Bishop Landa, the bishop that wrote the most about the Mayan civilization, was also responsible for burning all but about 6 books that had been accumulated in the place that he was. Almost nothing is left of the Mayan record because of that, because it was considered inferior and savage, because it wasn't Christianity. It's a sad state of things, and I think it is a sad state that unfortunately will continue. Our only hope is that more and more people stand up to say that I won't be cowed into believing what you believe just because you said so. Like, you have to actually change my heart and mind for me to change my beliefs. But until then, I will live exactly as I lived before. So, yeah, well, that about wraps it up for the episode. I hope that you enjoyed this first episode of Digging Deeper. Be sure to like and subscribe, set your notification to always on. If you have a story that you would be interested in me talking about, or that you're just interested in general, leave a note in the comments. I'll try to dig deeper next time. I'll try to dig deeper every time. And until next time, I'm Gabe Giannis, asking you to think at all costs. Talk to you next time. Bye.